Yeah.
Okay, Sana, you're live.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sana Wajid. I'm a sales rep here at Remax Empire. This is Ricky, our real estate lawyer, and that's Noor from Mortgage Alliance. So I'm just going to start here. So today's topic is the business of buying a home. And we're just going to start by just coming down to the fact that homes are needed. It's a need. And how do people live? So there's predominantly two different ways. One is either you rent a place or you own a place. Renting, essentially, you're just paying somebody else's mortgage. So we're going to kind of switch over to owning a home. And when you own a home, it's about building equity. You're able to refinance, you're able to reinvest, and you can also possibly create opportunities for rental income. An overview of buying a home. So definitely with home buying, there are challenges and opportunities that come. Now the same thing can be either a challenge or an opportunity. So over here, being able to see things from a different perspective and entertaining possibilities can be challenging, definitely. It's not always easy to be able to see things a certain way or to see things not a certain way. However, those two same things can also be opportunities. So if you're able to change your perspective, if you're able to open up your vision, you might be able to take that perspective and make it beneficial to you. It's the same thing about the possibilities. Until you don't actually sit down and see what the possibilities are out there, you won't really know how it will benefit you. So like I said, both these points here can be taken as challenges as well as opportunities. Now, when we're talking about perspectives and we're talking about current perspectives, what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about whatever catches the consumer's attention at that given time. So, for example, just when the crash happened, everyone just thought, oh, it's not a good time to invest because the market was crashing. But there were a lot of people who did invest at that time and benefited. So, it's just all about really understanding this matter and seeing what you can derive from it. Identifying the problem. Now, over here, safety is a need, right? So being able to own a home and have a roof over your head is a form of shelter, which is essentially one of our basic needs after food, water, that kind of stuff. People that are homeless, for example, they just get by on the necessities of just survival. They're not looking for that second step. But generally, most of us, we want that safety, we want that shelter, we want to be able to provide that to the people that we're dependent on. Usually you have a pixelated media view that is projected through news channels, radio stations, and we're so easy to believe it because it's something that is always repeated, and it just becomes a part of our thinking. And there's always a silver lining of that uncertainty. You're not sure when you're making such a big transaction, is it worth it, is it not? But like I said, until you don't actually understand and strategically plan this out, you won't really know how it will benefit you. And that's something that we can help you with. At the end of the day, it is human need to progress. We go to school, we send our kids to school because we want to be successful. And one of the biggest signs of success is being able to have that ownership of a house. The ultimate potential for owning a house. So, if you have the opportunity, you can actually live in a home for free. You can live in it for less money, depending on how much you're able to put down and things like that. You can even get paid to live in your house in regards to rental income. And then you even can have opportunities where you can save up for retirement. So there's many different outlets of owning a home. I actually want you to step in here and talk about CAP.
Oh yeah. So what Sena's referring to is when you buy a home, if it's your principal residence, there's certain tax implications with that. If it's a principal residence that you're disposing of, you don't pay any sort of income tax or capital gain on that disposition of that asset. And so over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, for as long as you own the home, what Sana's going to touch on later is how properties appreciate based on the payment of your mortgage, and then you have the appreciation. And so if you end up making $300,000-$400,000 over the next 20 years, when you sell that asset, you take that tax free. Whereas if it's an investment property, 50% of that is taxable. If you're considered to be in the business of buying and selling real estate, then it's 100% taxable. So depending on how you structure your acquisitions and your assets, there's a huge amount of money that you will have at your disposal at the time of retirement. Hopefully, that's the plan.
And like I've touched on before, home ownership still is the North American dream. I think that's what we all strive for. That's all what we work for. At the end of the day, we want to be able to achieve this. Remember, man can create anything except land. So what I mean over here is, at the end of the day, you run out of space. And when you run out of space and there's still a demand, that dominates then how expensive homes will get, right? And if your demand is more than the supply, then obviously we're just looking at prices going up. And that's also why we have houses that are going up and not spreading out, right? It's because we lack that land that we're starting to build upward. So that's something you want to think about now. Like, it's a great time to invest. It is a buyer's market at the moment, so that's definitely something that I want you guys to think about. And we're here always to help you guys. Any questions that you may have. Just a small video we put together. How do you make money owning a home? Again, what Ricky was talking about, the whole appreciation and rental income. So we're just gonna have a look at that, and then I'm gonna pass it on. Here that I put together was based on just the modest appreciation of 1%. Noor is actually going to go into more details as to what it actually looks like right now. But even if you are looking at your property appreciating at 1%, you're still in the business of making money. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up here and hand it over to Noor. Yes.
If we buy a home in Canada, say for example $500,000, and we rent it out, what is the percentage of rent that we are accepting?
So I want to take a second here and clarify the question, because it wasn't understood, and we clarified the issue with the individual after the seminar. Unfortunately, that wasn't recorded. But in essence, he was making the argument that if he was investing $500,000 and he was only seeing a return of investment of the appreciation and the principal payment, and it was negligible, when in fact he failed to realize, and this is what we got across after the fact, was that the actual initial investment wasn't $500,000. It was his down payment. And if he's a first-time home buyer, that's $25,000. On $25,000, if you look at that return, you're looking at a return on investment of between 25 and 30%, depending on how you structure the deal. In fact, more. If you look at it from the perspective of $100,000 down on a conventional mortgage with $100,000 down, so 20% on 500,000 is $100,000. Even on 100,000, if he's making $25,000 a year in principal appreciation and equity, that's a 25% return on investment, which was something he understood after the fact, and that's absolutely crazy.
Expecting.
That I think Sana can answer you better for that if you're renting out 500,000.
So usually, it depends on the location, and what part of the house are you renting out? Are you renting out the basement? The whole? I think we're somewhere around 22 to 2,500, depending on the area.
So we're looking at 0.5%.
Sure. So I think so. So at the end of the day, what you have to keep in mind is that Ajax, Oshawa is different from Markham. If I'm looking at renting a 3-bedroom home in Markham, for example.
No, Markham would be $1 million.
Oh yeah, easily. Yeah. So it's a very different thing.
I'm looking at $500,000.
Yeah. So Oshawa, Ajax, you're looking at $1,800 approximately for a 3-bedroom. If it's a 4-bedroom, approximately $2,200, plus there's utilities on top of that.
So it's less than 0.5%.
Yeah, but then you also have the prospect of the basement too. So if you have a segregated upstairs with a finished basement, separate entrance, usually a basement in those areas you're looking $750 to $900 depending on.
So totally it will be about close to $3,500.
But now what you have to keep in mind, and I think this is where Noor's expertise is going to come in, on your mortgage of $2,400 a month, 1/3 of that is going down into paying the principal, right? So $800 a month, which means $9,600 annually. So you add that onto your calculation. Plus you also have the appreciation. So what Sana is saying is 1%. But
appreciation is 1% is what
That's just at a modest, like,
that's
bare
ballpark
minimum.
figure.
That's morbid.
Yeah,
so if you look at
exactly.
certain territories in those areas, we've seen appreciation 3, 4, 5% annually. So we're saying forget the hoopla. Let's go stick it with 1%. Even if it's 0%, you still made money. But if it's 1%, you're looking at $5,000 on top of that. There's no business where you can live in an asset or rent an asset that pays for itself in that regard. If I need to make $15 an hour, I have to go out and do that. In this situation, it's a very different sort of perspective. And the benefit is that over the long run, it makes money for you. Now, if it's an investment, you have to keep in mind there's tax implications. So usually what people do and how we structure it, if you're a first-time home buyer, I've had clients that have gone in and actually moved into the basement, rented out upstairs to maximize their value, and then we've taken out the equity 3, 4, 5 years later and then reinvested in condos. And so you have people that make $40,000, $50,000 a year that we've seen as an example that are now worth $1 million. They might be cash poor, but they're very wealthy, asset rich. So maybe you break down some of the numbers.
A little bit about me. My name is Noor, Batish, and I've been in this business for over 7-8 years now. Used to work with Scotiabank before this, and now I jumped into Mortgage Alliance as mortgage broker. It's been over 2 years with them as well. And throughout this market, I've seen the market go up and down a lot, right? But overall, it has only gone up. Like we all have seen it, like even worse time as 2007 when the recession happened, and still the market is going up, right? This is why would you invest in a property? Because we're following Vancouver, New York, those big cities where like even buying a quarter is $1 million, right? Toronto is following almost the same path. We are like one of second best city to live in the world, right? So every year, just from India, I'd say over 200,000 for sure. Right? They gotta live somewhere. Right? Supply is less and demand is high. Doesn't matter what's happening with the interest rate, it's only going up. Right? They do go stagnant for a little bit and then go back up. That's the best time to buy that house, I would say. Like right now, right? Like prices are like steady now. Buy it now and then you'll see big future in them. And the process of this is first, if you're looking at the investment property, I would say find a location, because sometimes if your kids are going to school, right, buy it close to downtown and then they can live there, and then that can be a great investment for them as well. At the same time, you're saving residential costs for them, right? And on top of that, there's you can, if you're buying closer to like in cities like Markham itself, the rental, as we just spoke, it's about $2,000, right? It's covering your expenses, right? And most of these like interest costs and stuff like that, they're all covered, right? They're all tax deductible, right? I'm sure if you talk to a accountant, they'll give you more information on that. And in a process, I would say first decide which area you want to buy and sit with Sana, and then she'll definitely help you with that. And then see how much, if you're investing, then if you already have a house, then we can definitely help you by refinancing the house and bringing out the down payment from there, and then helping you secure the financing for that house. And if you're doing a first-time home buyer, then you can start from 5%, right? And then we'll show you how you can make the payments and then later take out the money as well from it, right? And as I spoke earlier, your rental should be covering the expenses anyways.
Is that always the case as a first-time home buyer? It's always 5%?
You can put down more, but 5% is the minimum
Is
that
the
you have to
minimum?
put in. Yes.
Is that like a break
Yes.
you get as a first-time home buyer?
Yeah. And on top of that, actually, there's other breaks that Ricky spoke about, like you get.
I'll touch on that. Yeah, I'm going to get into the rebates.
Awesome. And this is just one small example that she actually played video on.
It's actually in front of you guys. So if you look at this, it's kind of based off of this listing over here, and you can see what you get for that amount of money and the location, and then you go on.
So if you're purchasing a house for $500,000, for investment you have to put down 20%, right? And you're putting down approximately $100,000. Right now, approximately rate is 3.6%, right? We will amortize it over 30 years, so your payment is less, right? And your rental income is coming more, so that you can actually bring in some cash, right? Or if not, at least covering all the expenses, right? And if you were to, if you're buying it as a first-time home buyer, then you can, you only need to bring in $25,000 as down payment, right? And then using the same interest rate, we'll amortize it for 25 years. The payment's around $492. And as the time passes, the value is going up, then you can do your future investments using by refinancing the house as well. And some of the benefits for investing is one, that rental income does cover most of the expenses, if not all. And then most expenses related to that income will be tax deductible. And if in worst case scenario, like you have to sell it, it's liquidable, you can sell it fast. Sana's here for that. And just, you gotta look for good tenants that'll pay off your mortgage, right?
I've done a little research in terms of investment internationally.
Right.
From India.
Right.
Right? Investing in India is not safe anymore.
Right.
Dubai
Bringing out is really hard.
Dubai is not safe anymore.
Right.
And as far as what research I found, I think Canada is the most safest place to invest.
Especially
Because because it's like Dubai, they can kick you out anytime.
exactly.
India is unstable.
Yeah.
Right? Canada is a place where a lot of people come in, like you said,
Exactly.
supply and demand.
Exactly. I
Yes.
think
And on that point too, it's very interesting that you mentioned that. If you look at, we do another seminar called Middle Class to Millionaire, and in that, one of the things we talk about is a study that David Suzuki conducted, where he says that Canada is basically sucking all of the human capital.
Yeah.
And if you look at who we're sucking into the country, we've got literally in downtown people that are driving Ubers or cabs that are doctors in other countries. And these are not people that intend on driving Ubers or cabs for the rest of their lives. These are people that are very motivated. And so the kind of caliber of individual that's entering the country now, either they're marrying a Canadian, they're bringing in an enormous amount of wealth, or they're highly educated, which is a very good thing. And if you look at where people are immigrating within the country, we're a hub, we're a hotspot, which is why we're now going upwards, because prices are...
I did a little bit of research and I came to know that this is the safest place.
Yeah.
You know, your money is safe here,
That's right.
rather than in the Middle East
Yeah.
or back home in India.
Yeah.
we still have so much land to explore yet. We're still just focused on Toronto, right?
Actually,
as we are
what
moving
I
up,
was told is
everything's moving.
there's limited space.
Right.
Right. The term bubble bust is not going to happen.
No.
I don't think so. This is what I feel.
Slice a lot.
Yeah, because you cannot expand. There's only
Yeah.
so much you can expand,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
In GTA.
Exactly. And as a mortgage broker, we deal with all kind of lenders here. So depending on what kind of client it is, if it's a self-employed, right, or if it's like credit is not that great, or income is a little bit here and there, we can definitely help with them depending on like where they.
What about these guys who flip houses? I get to meet a lot of people.
Right.
I'm an interior designer. Right. I sell kitchens. I get a lot of clients who buy kitchens, and their job is to buy an old house, redo the entire thing, refurbish the whole thing, and then they sell it.
Right.
They make about $200,000-$300,000,
Right.
and they keep doing it. So, how are they avoiding the taxes?
They generally move into the house.
No, they're not. It depends. I'll touch on that for you.
Ah.
Yeah, I'll cover that. Yeah.
Tax for that purpose. And any other questions you regarding mortgage or how to get approval? And my card is there, so you can always call me.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me bring mine up. So the people that you're referring to are usually people like yourself who are doing this full time, and they're considered flippers by definition. Because when you look at what the CR, and I'm not an accountant, I'm a real estate lawyer, but I own many properties. I've been in the business for over 12 years now, as a lawyer as well as a broker. And so what it is that the CRA, fortunately and unfortunately, is a self-reporting system, which means that they believe pretty much whatever you tell them, unless they have a reason not to, at which point you get audited. Nobody wants to get audited. So when you're flipping properties, you're making your $200,000-$300,000. Sure, it depends on the situation. It also comes down to how you structured the transaction, what your costs are, because the tax implication is on your profit net, not gross. So there's many things, but those are also people that are happy because as a tradesperson, they're in there, they're doing what they love doing.
If you own a house, right? You own a house.
Yeah.
Then you buy another house.
Yeah.
Right. The second house you sell.
Yeah.
So the capital gains
50%
is
starting. Yeah.
for the second house.
Now, if you're
not for the first house.
No, first one you take tax free.
So you sell the first house and buy another house,
Yeah.
you don't pay capital gains.
No,
But if you own two houses,
that's right.
and you sell the first house,
Yeah.
do you still pay capital gains?
You'll pay capital gain. You designate one property as a principal residence. Now, what most people confuse is a matrimonial home with a principal residence.
What if you sell a residential property and buy a commercial property? You still pay capital gains?
Well, it doesn't matter where you put your money. You could sell your principal residence and put in a GIC and make no money on it.
Okay.
Government doesn't care what you do with your money. That's your money. That's your nest egg.
Okay.
If you decide to put that in commercial real estate, you'll do that. But even when you structure that transaction, you may want to incorporate and then funnel the money through a corporation so that there's a legal barrier between you and whatever businesses that are operating. For example, if it's a commercial acquisition, I buy gas stations and strip plazas.
Yeah.
And so depending on the nature of the asset, some of them I structure so that I have holding companies that then rent out, and then there's accounting processes. But it depends on the level of sophistication. You can get very sophisticated with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm connected. So, here, take my chair, sorry. I didn't realize you were standing. Okay, so I guess Sana and Noor have covered a lot of ground. I'm here in my capacity today as a real estate lawyer to cover the rebate portion of the seminar. I'm not going to try to step on these guys' toes. But I think one thing that I really want to emphasize on Sana's side, and I think it might be good to do a video on this and send it to the attendees today to their email addresses as a private video. Okay. So if you guys want to leave your email addresses and contact details, she'll send you a video. So when we present, for example, Middle Class to Millionaire, which we conduct at many of the local libraries, in that we break down, for example, the purchase price of $500,000. We talk about the difference between a 5% down payment versus a 20%, and then we differentiate between high ratio mortgages and conventional mortgages. So you can kind of see, okay, on the one hand, I'm paying mortgage default insurance. On the other hand, I'm not. On the other hand, I'm putting more capital up front, right? So in those seminars, we really break it down. And one of the things I really want to get across, because it's relevant to what we've discussed today, is that with your mortgage payment, if approximately a third goes down into paying the mortgage off, so if every month you're paying $800 into your mortgage, that's $9,600 that you've paid down annually. As your mortgage is paid down, usually terms are 3 years, 5 years, and they're amortized 25, 30 years, depending on the situation, what you qualify at. The longer you've carried the loan, the more goes into principal as years go on. So what we're giving is a initial figure so we don't complicate matters here. So looking at the $9,600, you're paying off your mortgage annually in that regard. If you've bought a home for $500,000, adding 1% annually First year it's going to be 5,000. Next year it's 1% on 505,000, then 510, and so it exponentially grows in that regard. And so when we look at the appreciation stats, and I think you should send them a home price index at Oshawa as well. If you look at historically, when they talk about the bubble bursting and everything happening, we've seen a lot since April. And April, when our three amigos went in front of the podium and made their 16-point plan, they changed a lot of things. But the main thing that they changed was consumer perspective. Now, a lot of people come to realize eventually when they talk to brokers and lawyers and mortgage agents like us, real estate is tangible. It's something you can live in. I can't live in a stock. Stocks go up and down. If I put my money in stocks and I lose them, they're gone. Whereas real estate, everybody needs it. We all need it. I'm not going to find one person in this room who won't need a place to live in. Whether you're living with your parents or you have your own asset, we all need it. So it's something that's always going to remain, right? And that's key. So as far as I'm concerned, my history, so you know a little bit about my background. I started in this business when I was 18. I only got my license in real estate because my dad's like, you're going to need a place to live. You might as well save commission. That was it, on all honesty. In my first summer, I ended up selling 40 condos and making $250,000 and my whole game changed, okay? So in 2007, and Noor can attest to this, you could qualify if you were a first-time home buyer with 0% down. So I took all my credit cards, maxed them out. I closed my first condo right in front of the CN Tower when nobody wanted to touch condominiums. 2 years later, when I got the keys, I went to RBC. They gave me an open line of credit, $80,000, no problem. I took 70 out of the $80,000 and I bought 2 more properties. Today I own 19 properties and 2 gas stations. So my point is that if you have the right support, the right team backing you up, there is an incredible amount of money to be made as a home investor, as a first-time home buyer, and it's a start. Yeah. Whereas if you contrast that with if you end up renting a home, you're helping somebody else grow their portfolio and they're not doing anything for yourself. So let me now touch on my presentation as a real estate lawyer, and then we'll take any questions you guys might have. Okay. So first and foremost, I want to make sure I mention this. It's not to be construed as legal advice. We give generic information, but I want you to appreciate that situations are very unique. There's always loopholes when it comes to law. So take this as general information. If you want to sit down and qualify your transaction, we're happy to tell you what applies and doesn't apply to your transaction. Okay? So first and foremost, who is a first-time home buyer? Okay, so when we talk about the legal aspects and the rebates, to qualify, and I'm going to come up to the amounts in a second, to qualify as a first-time home buyer, the individual acquiring the asset has to be at least 18 years old. Okay, that's a requirement. The second thing is that you have to take occupancy within 9 months, which means that if you're a first-time home buyer, if you end up buying a commercial property as your first property, which you're not going to do, you're not going to qualify more than likely because you're usually 30-35% down in those kind of situations. If you're not buying a residential home, you don't qualify for the rebate. I've actually closed deals where I had a dad come in, he wasn't qualifying for his finance on a plaza, he added his son to make the application a little bit better. Son was a first-time home buyer. A year later, he came back to our office and said, I bought my house, I want my rebate. We said, you can't get it because you've already purchased a home. You cannot have owned a property. That's key, okay? And it has to be a residential transaction. Now, purchase must be residential, like I said. We're gonna talk about being married and not married and what the definition of a spouse is, okay? You have to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. This is a recent addition as of last January. Before that, if you were a first-time home buyer, you would qualify. Now they've tacked on another implication where if you're not a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, you don't qualify, okay? And then lastly, you cannot have owned a property anywhere in the world, okay? Now I know that clients come to my law office and they'll lie to me, but the reality is that more often than not, the CRA cannot find out, the Ministry of Finance cannot find out that you've owned assets in other countries, but that doesn't mean you should be doing it. The criteria, and you swear off on this with your lawyer, is that you have not owned a property anywhere in the world, okay? And last thing, does not reset. So there is a misconception with the general public that after 5 or 6 years, if you sell your home, the first-time home buyer rebate resets. It never resets. It's a one-time thing only, okay? All right, so next thing, let's talk about spouses, and I hope you can see this. So in the province of Ontario, there's 2 types of spouses. We have the definition of the spouse I'm blocking everybody here, that is defined in the Family Law Act. So as far as the Family Law Act is concerned, a spouse or spouses are married to one another if you're legally married. That's one, okay? On the other hand, there is a cohabiting definition of a spouse. If you live with somebody and there's permanence in the relationship for 3 years or more, you are by definition considered a spouse even though you haven't married legally, okay? There's another thing to keep in mind, that if you have a child with the person you're cohabiting with, even if you don't hit the 3-year mark, if there's permanence in that relationship, you are a spouse. Now, why do we care about all of this? The reason we care about this is that if you end up marrying somebody who owns a property and you're a first-time home buyer, if you don't purchase that property before the marriage, you lose your rebate. I just got engaged a couple of months ago. I own many properties. My fiance owns nothing. So the first thing we're gonna do before our marriage in July is buy her a property so we can capitalize on her first-time home buyer rebates. Now, if I were to sell all of my assets before marrying her, which is unlikely in this situation, then we would both qualify. So that's a trigger point. Many people don't know that, okay? Now, Canadian citizen or permanent resident, if you believe that you will be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, after the acquisition of the asset, you have up to 18 months to apply for the rebate on your own, okay? Otherwise, what ends up happening is if you sign all the stat decks with me as a lawyer, we address the rebate at the time of closing. You don't pay the money and get it back, we just do an adjustment right away when we register your deed, okay? Now, the next thing we have here is parents who co-sign. So I should preface this by saying that this doesn't necessarily include parents specifically. We're talking about first-time home buyers who are younger, who don't have the requisite qualifications to qualify for financing in their own. So as an example, my other brother, who started a little bit later, my dad had to co-sign his first couple of mortgages before he was able to qualify his own. So let's talk about that for a second. Okay, so there's two things I want to distinguish. One is a co-signer, one is a guarantor. A guarantor is somebody who's registered on the mortgage and not on title, but they're only guaranteeing the loan, which means that if the purchaser defaults on their mortgage, the bank comes after the guarantor and the purchaser. They can go after them both together. Severally, it's up to the bank how they want to proceed, okay? When it comes to a co-signer is somebody who's going on the deed. And this changes everything, because if you have somebody taking title with you, depending on how the deed is structured, either you're gonna get 50% of the rebate, or you're going to get a different portion. It depends on how you structure that transaction, okay? Okay, so I want to differentiate between two things. So for those of you that own real estate, you probably know that when you take title, you can take title as a joint tenant or a tenant in common, okay? If you're taking joint tenancy, you're usually going to do that with a parent or a spouse or a child in those situations. As an example, if me and Sana were to buy a property, I wouldn't go in joint tenancy with her, because the key factor with a joint tenancy is that if anything happens to me or to her, the surviving individual automatically owns the entire property. Whereas with a tenancy in common, you separate shares. So if she put up 50%, I put up 50%, we're registered as 50-50 owners. And if anything were to happen to me, I would have a will, and my estate would then deal with my asset. It wouldn't automatically go to her, okay? Now, why that's important is that if you're registering as a parent or as a co-signer, we can still structure the transaction so it's a joint tenancy. Now, when it comes to the situation, the Ministry of Finance has a loophole where they automatically determine that if it's parent and child or spouses, for example, it'll be considered a 50-50 share, even though there's no shares in a joint tenancy. And so in this situation, if I were to purchase as a first-time home buyer and my parent, my dad or mother were to co-sign on the application and take title, if we registered as joint tenants, I would get 50% of the total rebate, okay? Now, what's really interesting is that our law office has actually exploited a loophole where, for example, we structure it so it's 99% owned by the child and 1% owned by the parents. And the parents own the 1% as a joint tenancy. So if anything happens to either one of the parents, the surviving parent automatically owns that 1%. Now in this situation, if you structure it 99 and 1, the effect of that is that you can qualify for 99% of the rebate for your child, which is a big benefit. The one kicker, and this is where the independent legal advice comes in, is that as a parent, you have to really love your kids to do this, because if your kids stop paying the mortgage, you're on the hook for that loan. Okay, so that's the key thing to keep in mind there. Okay, now next thing, like I said, so if it's a guarantor instead of a co-signer, you're entitled to 100% because the person who's guaranteeing your loan is not on title. So it's really fundamental that when you start looking for a property, you talk to a qualified mortgage agent who knows the nuances with your bank. Because if the bank says, and I got instructions yesterday, for example, where the commitment said that the title has to be registered as joint tenants. If your mortgage agent or broker or bank representative doesn't structure the deal because they don't know what you're looking for, they may structure it in a way that you will not be able to take advantage of some of the loopholes that we know about. Okay? All right, next thing we have here is the total rebate amount. So in the province of Ontario, this only applies to Ontario, you get a maximum of up to $4,000 if you're a first-time home buyer. Now, if you're buying in Toronto, Ontario specifically, Toronto gives you another kickback because in Toronto, if you buy in Toronto, there's two taxes. Anywhere in Ontario, you pay a provincial land transfer tax. If you buy in Toronto, Ontario, not only do you pay the provincial government, you also pay the municipal government. So there's a double tax in Toronto. Okay? Now, when it comes to Toronto, to offset some of the tax implications, they give you a maximum of $4,475. So if you buy in Toronto, Ontario specifically, where me and my fiance are going to buy, we're going to qualify for $8,475 instead of $4,000. So that's Ontario, and then that's Toronto. Okay. And really, I guess my ending note is that it's critical that when you start this process, whether you're young or you're old or you're seasoned or inexperienced, that you have the right players in your field. Because if you don't have the right support and structure the transaction initially, you're not going to have your desired outcome. It's really critical that you meet with the requisite parties sooner rather than later, so that you avoid some of the other implications that are unsavory. So talk to Sana, talk to Noor. I'm here as a real estate lawyer. My law office closes hundreds of transactions annually. In 2016 and 2017, we did about 650 plus transactions alone. So we know what we're doing. Again, we've made this team of professionals to help you achieve your goals. And again, you're not buying stocks. You're not buying something that is risky per se. When you look at what's happening in the media, and Sana talks about pixelated views, they said, a year and a half ago after April that the market's crashing. But again, it's all a perspective. When they say it's crashing, you have to ask relative to when. They compared the best years we've ever seen in the last 25 years on the record with a year where we had a little bit of a slump. And so naturally a 25% decline based on number of transactions annually is far from what the picture is. If you look at the way properties have appreciated generally, we're still nowhere that we shouldn't be. And as far as the rates went up today. What did they go up by?
9.5.
Okay. So even with rates going up, I know when my dad tells me about the first property he bought it at Gerard and Jones back in '92, and his interest rates were 19%. It's like credit card debt, right? Your home is an incredible asset. I was in a situation where after law school, I had about $150,000 in credit card loans because I wasn't making money, I was just studying. And because my assets had appreciated so much, I was able to go to the bank, get an operating home equity line of credit at prime, 3-4%. So I took my line of credit, I paid off all of my bad debts, $150,000. And so my payments were reduced significantly. When you have a home, it's like having a safe. You're always growing your equity, but it's one of the greatest assets you can acquire. Does anybody have any questions for me specifically?
Actually, I was just, the only concern for me was the appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
You said it's only 1%?
That's morbid. This is just for the purposes of this seminar.
But where I've invested money, I've always looked at 10 to 20% appreciation per year.
Yeah.
1% seems very, very, very low.
It was just for argument's sake,
It's just
for this presentation.
Just for the presentation.
Yeah. Just
But
that's
in
what I'm
reality,
saying. What I was trying to say is that at worst case scenario, even if your house appreciates at 1%,
it's still better than
it's still better
nothing.
than nothing.
Even if
But
it's
I think
0%,
what we were
still
talking
better
about
than
today,
that.
we're looking at about 10, 11%. That's what you're looking at currently.
Yeah.
Is at about
That's
11.
more realistic.
Yeah.
And you have to keep in mind too. So for example, now with the number of assets I have, from time to time, what I'll do is I'll take out the equity from the bank and then I'll reinvest it in second mortgages, right? So as a second mortgage, when I register that through my law office as the chargee, I end up taking a lender fee of 1% or 2% up front out of my loan that I'm advancing, and I'm netting about 13% on those loans as well. But again, if I didn't have the assets to draw the capital from, I wouldn't be able to do that. So if I've become anything today, I've become a millionaire using other people's money. I haven't earned any of it really. I've used the bank's money, I've leveraged it in an intelligent fashion because I've had the right team, the right professionals who have guided me in that regard. So it's not just about real estate acquisitions, it goes very far. And so again, with the right team, they can point you in the right direction, connect you with the right people. If you're looking at greater returns, maybe real estate isn't your cup of tea. Because if the plan is to make 13, 14, 15% guaranteed, second mortgages is great. But then again, it depends on your situation. Some of our clients don't believe in interest. But then again, it's still better than playing in stocks. It all comes down to where you are, what your needs are, and how we can service those needs. All right.
So thank you for coming out today. Sorry? Thank you for coming out today. I hope it was beneficial. We just left in like guest intake forms. So if you leave your name, your email address, phone number, then any information that comes up, we'll just pass that along to you guys, and hopefully that will be beneficial. And like Ricky said, we are here. We are a strong team. If there's anything you ever need, don't hesitate to contact us at any time. So I guess that's 7:30 just right now. We hit it. Are you guys ready to buy? Yeah, good job.
I like the